Sarah Elizabeth Thompson stood at her kitchen window, watching the last golden rays of sunset paint the Texas sky. Her calloused hands gripped the edge of the worn wooden counter as she whispered the words that had haunted her for weeks, "I have nothing for him." The words felt heavy in the empty farmhouse, echoing off walls that had once been filled with laughter and dreams. At 28, Sarah had already lived through more heartbreak than most women twice her age. The drought of 1934 had claimed their crops, the bank had claimed their cattle, and, just 3 months ago, consumption had claimed her husband, James. Now she stood alone on 50 acres of dust and memories, wondering how she would survive another winter, let alone provide for the man who had shown her nothing but kindness. The man in question was Samuel "Sam" McGrath, a traveling cowboy who had appeared at her door 6 weeks after James's funeral. Unlike the other men who had come sniffing around the widow's property with greedy eyes and false sympathy, Sam had simply tipped his hat and asked if she needed help with her fence line. When she admitted she couldn't pay him, he had smiled that easy smile of his and said, "Ma'am, I wasn't asking for money." That had been 2 months ago, and, true to his word, Sam had never asked for payment. He mended her fences, fixed her roof, chopped enough firewood to last through winter, and somehow managed to nurse 3 sick chickens back to health. Every evening, he would tip his hat politely and ride off toward town, only to return the next morning with that same gentle smile and a willingness to work. Sarah had tried to feed him at least, but her pantry grew emptier each day. The few vegetables in her garden were all that stood between her and starvation, and even those were beginning to fail in the harsh autumn heat. She had sold everything of value, her mother's china, James's pocket watch, even her wedding dress, just to keep food on the table for another week. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts, and Sarah's heart sank. Sam was returning from town, probably expecting supper as he had for the past week. She had managed to scrape together enough cornbread and beans to feed them both, but barely. Tomorrow, she knew, there would be even less. She watched through the window as Sam dismounted from his horse, a magnificent chestnut mare named Rosie. Even in the fading light, Sarah could see the care with which he handled the animal, the gentle way he rubbed her nose and checked her hooves. Everything about Sam spoke of kindness and patience, qualities that made Sarah's current situation even more painful. Sam was not a large man, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent his life working with his hands. His brown hair was always neatly combed despite his long days in the sun, and his clothes, while worn, were always clean and mended. He was the kind of man her mother would have called decent folk, the kind of man who deserved better than a widow with empty pockets and an empty pantry. As his boots sounded on the front porch steps, Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and smoothed her dress. It was her only good dress, a blue cotton frock that had seen better days but still held its shape. She had let out the seams twice since James died, not from gaining weight, but from losing so much that the dress hung like a sack on her diminishing frame. "Evening, Mrs. Thompson," Sam called through the screen door, his voice carrying that warm drawl that reminded her of summer evenings before her world fell apart. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I brought something from town I thought you might like." Sarah opened the door, forcing a smile despite the knot in her stomach. "Of course, Mr. McGrath. Please, come in." She had been trying for weeks to get him to call her Sarah, but he maintained his polite formality with the dedication of a man raised right. Sam stepped into her small kitchen, removing his hat to reveal hair that curled slightly at the edges from a day's work in the heat. In his hands, he carried a small cloth bundle that gave off the most wonderful aroma Sarah had smelled in weeks. "Mrs. Patterson at the general store mentioned you hadn't been in for your usual supplies," Sam said carefully, setting the bundle on her table. "I took the liberty of picking up a few things I thought you might need." Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment. Of course, Mrs. Patterson had noticed her absence from the store. The whole town probably knew by now that the Thompson widow was struggling. "Mr. McGrath, that's very kind, but I couldn't possibly accept. It's just some basic supplies," Sam interrupted gently. "Flour, sugar, a bit of salt pork. Nothing fancy." He unwrapped the bundle to reveal not just the items he had mentioned, but also fresh eggs, real butter, and a small jar of honey that gleamed like liquid gold in the lamplight. Sarah stared at the bounty on her table, feeling her eyes well up with tears she couldn't hold back. It represented more food than she had seen in weeks, enough to make proper meals for several days. But it also represented something she couldn't accept: charity from a man she was already indebted to beyond any hope of repayment. "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't take this. I can't keep taking from you when I have nothing to give in return. Nothing at all." Sam studied her face for a long moment, his green eyes kind but serious. "Mrs. Thompson, if I may speak plainly, I think you're misunderstanding the nature of our arrangement." "What arrangement?" Sarah asked, confused. "You work for nothing, and I feed you scraps like a beggar." "There's no arrangement, Mr. McGrath. There's just your kindness being wasted on someone who can't even properly appreciate it." Sam set his hat on the table and moved closer, but not so close as to make her uncomfortable. "I don't work for nothing, ma'am. Every day I spend here, every job I do around this place, I'm working for something very valuable." Sarah looked up at him, puzzled. "I don't understand." "I'm working for the chance to prove to you that you're worth more than you think you are," Sam said quietly. "I'm working for the opportunity to show you that not every man sees a woman as a burden to be taken care of, or property to be claimed. I'm working for the possibility that someday, you might see yourself the way I see you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning that Sarah wasn't ready to examine too closely. She had been a widow for only 5 months, and her heart still felt raw from loss. But there was something in Sam's voice, something in the way he looked at her, that made her pulse quicken in a way it hadn't since before James took sick. "How do you see me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam smiled, the gentle smile that had become so familiar to her. "I see a woman who gets up every morning and faces a world that's trying its best to break her. I see someone who tends to sick chickens with the same care she would show a child. I see a lady who offers supper to a drifting cowboy even when she's not sure where her next meal is coming from. I see strength, Mrs. Thompson. I see grace under pressure. I see a woman any man would be lucky to know." Sarah felt her face flush, and she turned away to hide the tears that were threatening to spill over. "You see more than what's there, Mr. McGrath." "Do I?" Sam moved around so he could see her face again. "Or do you see less than what's actually there?" Before Sarah could answer, Sam reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small glass bottle. "I almost forgot the most important thing I brought." He held up the bottle, which was filled with rich, creamy milk that was still warm to the touch. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned you'd been asking about milk for tea," Sam explained. "Her cow's been producing extra, and she wanted you to have some." Sarah stared at the bottle of milk, and, suddenly, the dam burst. She sank into one of her kitchen chairs and wept, not the quiet, dignified tears of a lady in distress, but the hard, ugly sobs of a woman who had been holding on by a thread for too long. Sam didn't try to comfort her with words or awkward pats on the shoulder. Instead, he quietly began unpacking the groceries, putting things away in her pantry as if he had done it 100 times before. When he was finished, he sat in the chair across from her and waited. "I'm sorry," Sarah finally managed, wiping her eyes with her apron. "I don't usually. I try to be stronger than this." "Being strong doesn't mean never crying, Mrs. Thompson," Sam said softly. "Sometimes crying is the strongest thing you can do." Sarah looked at him across her small kitchen table, this kind man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. The late evening light filtered through her window, casting everything in a warm, golden glow that made the moment feel almost dreamlike. "Why are you really here, Mr. McGrath?" she asked. "I know it's not just because you enjoy mending fences and chopping wood." Sam leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. "I've been drifting for most of my adult life, Mrs. Thompson. Following cattle drives, working ranches, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I told myself I liked the freedom, the open road, the adventure of never knowing what was around the next bend." He paused, looking out the window toward where his horse stood patiently waiting. "But the truth is, I was running from something. I was running from the idea of settling down, of being responsible for someone else's happiness, of risking the kind of loss that tears a person apart." "What changed?" Sarah asked, though she thought she might already know the answer. "I met a woman who had already survived the worst thing I was afraid of," Sam said, meeting her eyes. I met someone who had loved completely, lost everything, and was still getting up every morning to face another day. I realized that running from loss doesn't protect you from it, it just ensures that when it comes, you'll face it alone. Sarah felt her breath catch. Sam. It was the first time she had used his given name, and they both noticed. The sound of it seemed to change something in the air between them, making the conversation feel more intimate, more personal. I'm not asking you for anything you're not ready to give, Sarah, Sam said, and the sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. I'm just asking you to let me prove that you don't have to face everything alone. Let me help. Let me be here. Let me show you that you have more to offer the world than you think. Sarah wiped her eyes again, feeling steadier than she had in months. What if I can't love again? What if I'm too broken, too used up? Then, we'll figure that out together, Sam said simply. But, I don't think you're broken, Sarah. I think you're healing. And, I'd like to be here while you do. Outside, the last light was fading from the sky, and Sarah realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't dreading the approach of night. With Sam sitting across from her table, with food in her pantry and warm milk for her evening tea, the darkness didn't seem quite so threatening. Will you stay for supper? She asked, her voice stronger now. I can make something proper with what you brought. Sam smiled, and Sarah felt her heart skip. I'd be honored, ma'am. As Sarah rose to begin cooking, she caught sight of her reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back at her still had shadows under her eyes and worry lines around her mouth, but there was something else there too, a spark of hope that had been missing for far too long. She murmured to herself, but this time the words were different, maybe I do have something for him after all. The evening passed quietly, filled with gentle conversation and the comfortable sounds of a shared meal. When Sam finally took his leave, tipping his hat with that familiar gesture, Sarah stood on her porch and watched him ride away. But, for the first time since he had started coming around, she wasn't worried about whether she would see him again. She was beginning to understand that Sam McGrath was not the kind of man who made promises lightly. And, tonight, with his words and his kindness, he had made her a promise that she was finally ready to believe that she was worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth loving. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah made herself a cup of tea with the warm milk Sam had brought, savoring the rich taste and the warmth that spread through her chest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new worries, new uncertainties. But, tonight, for the first time in months, Sarah Thompson felt like she might just have a future worth looking forward to. The moon was full and bright as it rose over the Texas landscape, casting silver light across the fields and farmhouses scattered throughout the valley. Somewhere in that peaceful night, a cowboy was making his way back to town, already planning the next day's work and the next opportunity to prove that love doesn't always come when you're looking for it, sometimes it comes when you most need it, carried by a stranger with kind eyes and gentle hands who sees something in you that you've forgotten how to see in yourself. 3 weeks after the evening with the warm milk, Sarah found herself humming as she worked in her kitchen. It was barely dawn, but she had risen early to prepare a proper breakfast for Sam before he started his work. The pantry that had once stood nearly empty now held basic staples, thanks to his quiet generosity and her growing ability to accept help without shame. She had discovered something remarkable about herself in recent days. She was remembering how to hope. Sam arrived just as the sun crested the horizon, his usual punctual self. But, today, something was different about him. His easy smile seemed forced, and there was a tension in his shoulders that Sarah had never noticed before. "Morning, Sarah," he said, hanging his hat on the hook by the door that had somehow become his spot. The casual use of her first name still sent a little thrill through her, even after 3 weeks of growing familiarity. "Good morning," she replied, studying his face. "You look like a man carrying heavy thoughts." Sam attempted his usual smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Nothing that can't wait. What needs doing around here today?" Sarah set a plate of eggs and bacon before him, along with fresh biscuits made from the flour he had brought. "The only thing that needs doing is you telling me what's troubling you." For a moment, Sam just stared at his breakfast, pushing the eggs around with his fork. Then, he set down his utensil and looked directly at her. "I got a letter yesterday from my brother in Colorado. Our father's taken sick, and they want me to come home." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She sank into the chair across from him, trying to process what this meant. "How sick?" "Sick enough that they think I should come soon if I want to see him again," Sam said quietly. "We haven't spoken in 5 years, not since I left to follow the cattle drives. But he's still my father." Sarah nodded, understanding the pull of family obligation even when relationships were complicated. "Of course you have to go." "I don't want to leave you," Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not now, not when we're just beginning to." He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah knew what he meant. Something had been growing between them, something precious and fragile that neither of them had dared to name. The thought of him leaving, perhaps permanently, made her chest tight with panic. "How long would you be gone?" she asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "I don't know. Could be weeks, could be months. Could be." He stopped, unable to say the word forever, but it hung in the air between them. Sarah reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact with him, and the warmth of his skin under her palm sent unexpected comfort through both of them. "Then, you'd better eat your breakfast," she said with forced lightness. "You'll need your strength for the journey." Sam turned his hand palm up and gently squeezed her fingers. "Sarah, I want you to know that leaving you is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. If there was any way around it." "There isn't," Sarah said firmly. "And I wouldn't respect you if you ignored your family's call. That's not the kind of man you are." They finished breakfast in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Afterward, Sam worked with unusual intensity, as if trying to complete a month's worth of tasks in a single day. He repaired the chicken coop more thoroughly than necessary, chopped enough wood to last through the harshest winter, and even fixed a loose board on the porch steps that had been wobbling for years. As the day wore on, neighbors began arriving with news that spread through the small community like wildfire. Mrs. Patterson from the general store came by mid-morning with fresh eggs and barely concealed curiosity. "Heard that nice young man of yours is heading out," she said, her eyes bright with the prospect of fresh gossip. "Shame to lose such a hard worker just when winter's coming on." Sarah bristled at the casual assumption that Sam belonged to her, even though part of her wished it were true. "Mr. McGrath has family obligations to attend to." "I'm sure everyone understands the importance of family." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Still, it does leave you in quite a predicament. A woman alone on a farm this size, with winter coming." The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah knew exactly what the older woman was thinking, the same thing everyone in town was probably thinking. Without Sam's help, how would she survive? Would she be forced to sell the farm and move into town, perhaps become dependent on charity or the questionable kindness of men with less honorable intentions? After Mrs. Patterson left, others came by throughout the day. Some offered genuine help and concern, while others seemed more interested in satisfying their curiosity about the situation between the widow and the cowboy. By late afternoon, Sarah felt drained from maintaining polite conversation while her world was quietly falling apart. Sam noticed her exhaustion and suggested she rest while he finished the last of his projects. Sarah retreated to her bedroom but found herself unable to sleep. Instead, she sat by her window, watching him work in the yard below. She had grown accustomed to his presence in ways that surprised her. The sound of his boots on the porch steps, the sight of his horse grazing in her pasture, the knowledge that she wasn't facing each day completely alone, these things had become more important to her than she had realized. As evening approached, Sam knocked on her bedroom door. "Sarah? I wanted to talk to you before it gets too late." She found him standing in her kitchen, cleaned up from his day's work but still wearing that serious expression that had marked his mood all day. On the table between them sat a small wooden box that she didn't recognize. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you," Sam began, his hands nervous as he gestured toward the box. "We haven't known each other long enough for me to make the kind of promises that a woman deserves. But I need you to know something before I leave." Sarah approached the table slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What do you need me to know?" I need you to know that what I feel for you isn't just kindness or sympathy or the attraction of a lonely man to a beautiful woman, Sam said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. I love you, Sarah Thompson. I love your strength and your grace and your stubborn independence. I love the way you tend to wounded creatures and the way you face each day with courage you don't even know you have. Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. Sam. I know it's too soon, he continued, opening the wooden box to reveal a simple gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. I know you're still healing from your loss, and I know I don't have any business asking a woman to wait for me when I can't promise when I'll be back. The ring caught the lamplight, sending tiny sparkles dancing across the kitchen walls. Sarah stared at it, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. But I had to ask anyway, Sam said, taking the ring from the box and holding it out to her. Not for you to marry me now, but for you to consider the possibility that we might have a future together. Will you keep this ring and think about what it might mean? Sarah looked from the ring to Sam's face, seeing hope and fear and love all tangled together in his green eyes. The practical part of her mind whispered warnings about rushing into relationships, about the risks of loving again, about the uncertainty of his return. But a stronger voice, one that sounded like her own heart, whispered something entirely different. I don't need to think about what it might mean, she said softly, extending her left hand. I already know. Sam's face transformed with surprise and joy as he understood her meaning. With hands that trembled slightly, he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Sarah, are you saying? I'm saying that I love you too, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I'm saying that I don't want to spend another day wondering if I'm brave enough to open my heart again. I'm saying yes to whatever future we can build together. Sam stepped around the table and took her in his arms, holding her close against his chest. Sarah could feel his heart beating as rapidly as her own, could smell the familiar scent of leather and sunshine that seemed to follow him everywhere. I promise you, he whispered into her hair, I will come back. No matter how long it takes, no matter what happens with my father, I will come back to you. I know you will, Sarah replied, and she realized she truly believed it. This wasn't a man who made empty promises or spoke words he didn't mean. And I'll be here waiting. They stood together in the kitchen as the sun set outside, holding each other and making quiet plans for the future. Sam would leave in 3 days, after he finished securing her property for the winter months ahead. He would write to her every week, and she would write back. They would marry when he returned, whether that was in 1 month or 6. I have something for you too, Sarah said, stepping back from his embrace to retrieve something from the kitchen drawer. It was a small silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother, one of the few pieces of jewelry she hadn't sold during the hardest times. I can't take this, Sam protested, recognizing its value and significance. You're not taking it, Sarah corrected, fastening the chain around his neck. You're keeping it safe until you can give it back to me on our wedding day. Sam touched the locket where it rested against his chest, understanding the symbolism of the gesture. She was giving him something precious to hold, just as he was leaving something precious with her. That night, they sat together on the front porch, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams. Sam told her about his childhood in Colorado, about the ranch where he grew up and the father he both loved and resented. Sarah shared stories about her life with James, and, for the first time since his death, the memories brought more comfort than pain. I used to think that loving someone meant never being able to love anyone else, she confided as they watched the stars emerge in the clear night sky. But now I think maybe love isn't finite like that. Maybe each person we love teaches us something different about ourselves. What did James teach you? Sam asked gently. He taught me that I was worthy of being loved, Sarah replied. That I was strong enough to be a partner, not just someone to be taken care of. And what do you think I'm teaching you? Sarah considered the question seriously. You're teaching me that I'm brave enough to love again. That my heart is bigger than I thought it was. Sam squeezed her hand, the ring he had given her catching the moonlight. You're teaching me that home isn't a place, it's a person. It's this feeling of belonging somewhere, with someone. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as Sam prepared for his departure and, worked to ensure Sarah would be safe during his absence. He arranged for Mr. Patterson to check on her weekly, prepaid her account at the general store for basic supplies, and even convinced young Billy Jenkins to help with any heavy work she might need. But, perhaps most importantly, he helped Sarah see that she was stronger than she knew. When neighbors came by with thinly veiled offers to look after her or suggestions that she might be better off selling the farm, Sam stood beside her as she politely but firmly declined. "This is my home," Sarah told Mrs. Hendricks, who had been particularly insistent about the wisdom of a woman living alone. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." Sam beamed with pride at her confident tone, and Sarah felt a surge of self-assurance she hadn't experienced in months. On his last evening, Sam gave her one final gift, a journal bound in soft leather with her initials embossed on the cover. "For writing down your thoughts while I'm gone," he explained. "And maybe for writing letters to me that you can give me when I return." Sarah treasured the journal, understanding that it represented his faith in their future together. That night, after Sam had reluctantly returned to his room at the boarding house in town, Sarah wrote her first entry. "Today I became engaged to a man I have known for less than 3 months, and somehow it feels like the most sensible thing I have ever done. Tomorrow he leaves for Colorado, and I will begin the hardest waiting of my life. But I am not afraid. For the first time since James died, I am not afraid of what tomorrow might bring." The ring on her finger caught the lamplight as she wrote, and Sarah smiled through her tears. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as an engaged woman, a woman with a future to look forward to and love to sustain her through the waiting. Outside her window, the Texas landscape stretched endlessly under the star-filled sky, holding promises of seasons to come and a love strong enough to bridge any distance. 2 months had passed since Sam's departure, and winter had settled over the Texas landscape with unusual severity. Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she collected eggs from the henhouse, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid morning air. The ring on her finger had become a talisman of sorts, something she touched whenever doubt crept into her mind during the long, quiet days. Sam's letters arrived faithfully every week, brought by the postal rider who made his rounds through the scattered farms and ranches. Each envelope bore Sarah's name in Sam's careful handwriting, and she treasured every word. His father was indeed very ill, lingering between life and death in a way that made it impossible for Sam to leave Colorado. The family ranch was struggling without proper management, and Sam had reluctantly taken on more responsibilities than he had planned. "I think of you every morning when I wake and every evening when I close my eyes," his most recent letter had read. "The mountains here are beautiful, but they're not home. Home is wherever you are, and I count the days until I can return to you." Sarah had read that letter so many times the paper was beginning to wear thin along the fold lines. She kept all his letters in a wooden box beside her bed, along with the journal he had given her, which was now half filled with her thoughts, observations, and letters she planned to give him upon his return. The morning routine had become a source of comfort during these solitary weeks. She would collect the eggs, tend to her small flock of chickens, check the winter garden where a few hardy vegetables still grew, and then settle in to read Sam's latest letter with her morning coffee. The simple rhythms of farm life helped keep loneliness at bay, even when the wind howled around the house and reminded her how isolated she was. Today, however, her peaceful routine was interrupted by the sound of multiple horses approaching. Sarah peered out her kitchen window to see 3 riders making their way up the dirt road that led to her house. She didn't recognize any of them, and something about their manner made her uneasy. The men who dismounted at her fence were clearly not local farmers or ranchers. They wore city clothes and carried themselves with an aggressive confidence that immediately put Sarah on guard. The leader, a tall man with a carefully waxed mustache and expensive boots, approached her front door while his companions remained by their horses. "Mrs. Thompson," he called, his voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to getting his way. "I'm Mr. Richard Dalton from the Cattlemen's Association. I wonder if we might have a word." Sarah opened her door but remained behind the screen, maintaining the barrier between herself and these strangers. "What can I do for you, Mr. Dalton?" "I represent a group of investors who are very interested in your property," Dalton said, producing a folded document from his coat pocket. "We understand you've been having some financial difficulties since your husband's passing, and We'd like to make you a generous offer that could solve all your problems. The presumptuous nature of his statement rankled Sarah immediately. I wasn't aware that I had any problems that needed solving. Dalton's smile was condescending in a way that made Sarah's jaw clench. Mrs. Thompson, let's be realistic. A woman alone on a farm this size, with winter coming on and no help in sight? We know about the cowboy who is helping you. Word is he's moved on to greener pastures. Without his assistance, how do you expect to manage? I manage just fine, thank you, Sarah replied coolly, though her heart was beginning to race. How did these men know about Sam? And why were they so interested in her property? Of course you do, Dalton said in a tone that suggested he didn't believe her for a moment. But winter is hard, and you're all alone out here. What if something happened? What if you took sick or had an accident? Who would help you then? The questions weren't really questions, Sarah realized. They were threats, carefully veiled but unmistakable. I have neighbors who check on me regularly. I'm hardly as isolated as you seem to think. Neighbors can only do so much, one of Dalton's companions called from beside the horses. Especially when winter weather makes travel difficult. A lot can happen to a person between visits. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. These men weren't here to make a simple business proposition. They were here to intimidate her into selling, and they were making it clear that her safety might depend on her cooperation. Gentlemen, I appreciate your concern for my welfare, Sarah said, her voice steady despite her fear, but my property is not for sale. I suggest you continue your search for investment opportunities elsewhere. Dalton's friendly facade slipped slightly. Mrs. Thompson, I don't think you understand the full scope of what we're offering. This is a very generous proposal, more than generous, considering the condition of your land and the current market conditions. He held out the document again, but Sarah made no move to take it. I understand perfectly, Mr. Dalton. You want to buy my land, and I'm telling you it's not for sale. Good day. She started to close the door, but Dalton stepped forward, placing his hand against the frame to prevent it from shutting. I'm afraid it's not that simple, Mrs. Thompson. You see, there are certain legal matters that need to be considered. Tax obligations, for instance. Property maintenance requirements. A single woman might find herself facing unexpected complications if she doesn't have the proper support. The threat was now completely unveiled. Sarah's fear transformed into anger, and she drew herself up to her full height. Remove your hand from my door, Mr. Dalton. You're trespassing on my property, and I want you to leave immediately. Now, Mrs. Thompson, there's no need for hostility, Dalton said, but he didn't remove his hand. We're simply trying to help you avoid what could be a very difficult situation. Winter is coming, and accidents happen. Fires, for instance. Terrible things, fires. Especially in isolated areas where help might be delayed. Sarah's blood ran cold. They weren't just threatening to make life difficult for her, they were threatening to burn her house down. Her hand moved instinctively to touch the ring on her finger, drawing strength from the promise it represented. I said remove your hand and leave my property, Sarah repeated, her voice carrying a steel that surprised all of them, including herself. If you're still here in 5 minutes, I'll be firing my shotgun into the air to summon my neighbors. If you're here in 10 minutes, I'll be firing it at you. Dalton's eyes narrowed. You're making a serious mistake, Mrs. Thompson. We're offering you a way out of a situation that's only going to get worse. Without that cowboy here to protect you, you're more vulnerable than you know. My fiancé will be returning soon, Sarah said firmly, allowing them to draw their own conclusions about the timing. And, when he does, I'll be sure to mention this conversation to him. I'm certain he'll be very interested to hear about your visit. For the first time, Dalton looked uncertain. The presence of a protective male figure, even a temporarily absent one, clearly complicated their plans. Fiancé? I was told the cowboy had moved on permanently. You were told incorrectly, Sarah replied. Now leave. Dalton finally removed his hand from the door and stepped back, but his expression remained threatening. We'll be in touch, Mrs. Thompson. I suggest you reconsider our offer very carefully. Winter is long, and a lot can happen before spring. Sarah watched from her window as the three men mounted their horses and rode away, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. As soon as they were out of sight, she sank into her kitchen chair and allowed herself to shake. She had no idea who those men really were or what they wanted with her land, but their intentions were clearly malicious. The mention of fires and accidents wasn't casual conversation, it was a promise of what would happen if she continued to refuse their offer. For the first time since Sam's departure, Sarah felt truly alone and vulnerable. Her neighbors were good people, but they had their own families and farms to worry about. She couldn't ask them to stand guard over her property or involve them in what was clearly a dangerous situation. That afternoon, Sarah decided to ride into town to speak with Sheriff Morrison about her visitors. She hitched up her old mare, Bella, and made the journey despite the threatening clouds that suggested more snow was coming. Sheriff Morrison was a kind man in his 60s who had known Sarah's family for years. He listened to her account of the morning's events with growing concern, making notes in his ledger as she spoke. "I don't like the sound of this at all," he said when she finished her story. "Richard Dalton, you said? I've heard that name before, and not in a good context. There have been rumors of a group buying up land through intimidation tactics, but nothing we could prove. What should I do?" Sarah asked. "I can't sell the farm, it's all I have left of my life with James. But I can't protect myself against men like that either." Sheriff Morrison leaned back in his chair, considering the situation. "The problem is that they haven't actually done anything illegal yet. Making veiled threats isn't the same as carrying them out. But I'll make sure to increase patrols in your area, and I'll have a word with your neighbors about keeping an extra eye on things." It wasn't much comfort, but it was something. Sarah thanked the sheriff and prepared to head home, but as she reached the door, he called her back. "Mrs. Thompson, about this fiancé of yours, when exactly is he expected back?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not entirely certain. His father is very ill, and family obligations are keeping him in Colorado longer than anticipated." Sheriff Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "Might be wise to send him a telegram about this situation. A man tends to find ways to handle family obligations quickly when he knows his woman is in danger." The suggestion was practical, but Sarah hesitated. Sam was already dealing with his father's illness and the demands of keeping the family ranch running. She didn't want to add to his burdens or make him feel he had to choose between his duty to his family and his promise to her. But, as she rode home through the gathering darkness, with snow beginning to fall in earnest, Sarah realized that her safety might depend on Sam's return. The men who had visited today weren't going to simply give up and go away. They would be back, and next time they might not be content with mere threats. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with pen and paper, struggling to compose a telegram that would convey the urgency of the situation without sounding panicked. After several false starts, she settled on a simple message: "Sam, urgent business matter requires your attention. Property investors making threats. Need you home soon. All my love, Sarah." She would send it first thing in the morning, along with a longer letter explaining the full details of what had happened. In the meantime, she would follow the sheriff's advice and alert her neighbors to the potential danger. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah found herself checking the locks on her doors and windows multiple times. The house that had felt cozy and secure just that morning now felt exposed and vulnerable. Every sound outside made her heart jump. Was it just the wind, or were those men coming back under cover of darkness? She moved Sam's ring to a chain around her neck, tucking it beneath her nightgown where she could feel its weight against her skin. The physical reminder of his love and his promise gave her strength, even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. Before blowing out her lamp, Sarah wrote in her journal, "Today I learned that love isn't just about happiness and hope. Sometimes it's about courage in the face of fear, about standing up for what matters even when you're standing alone. I pray that Sam receives my telegram quickly and that he can find a way to return soon. But even if he can't, I won't let these men drive me from my home. This land represents everything James and I built together, and now it represents the future Sam and I hope to build. I won't give it up without a fight. Asterisk outside her window, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the Texas landscape in unusual winter white. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Sarah pulled her blankets closer around her shoulders. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, she would face them with the strength Sam had helped her discover in herself. The ring against her heart beat in rhythm with her pulse, a constant reminder that she was not as alone as she felt, and that love could bridge even the darkest nights and longest distances. The telegram Sarah sent reached Sam in Colorado 3 days later, delivered by a writer who had struggled through mountain snow to reach the McGrath ranch. Sam read the urgent message 3 times before the full implications sank in, and, when they did, his face went pale with fury and fear. He found his older brother Thomas in the barn, tending to a sick horse with the methodical care that had made him the backbone of their family operation. Thomas looked up as Sam burst through the door, the telegram clutched in his white-knuckled fist. "Tom, I have to go. Tonight." Thomas straightened slowly, studying his brother's face. The two men had grown closer during Sam's extended stay, working together to keep the ranch running while their father battled his illness. "What's happened?" Sam handed him the telegram, pacing restlessly while Thomas read the brief message. "Sarah's in danger. Some men came to her place making threats, trying to force her to sell her land. She's alone out there, Tom." "Completely alone. This woman means that much to you?" Thomas asked, though the question was really a statement. He had heard Sam talk about Sarah Elizabeth Thompson for weeks now, had seen the way his brother's face changed when he spoke her name. "She means everything to me," Sam said simply. "I asked her to marry me before I left. She's wearing my ring, Tom. She's my responsibility, and I left her defenseless." Thomas folded the telegram carefully, understanding the weight of the decision his brother was facing. Their father was still gravely ill, drifting in and out of consciousness, and the doctors had said it could be days or weeks before they knew if he would recover. The ranch needed constant attention to survive the harsh winter, and, with Sam gone, the burden would fall entirely on Thomas and their aging foreman. But Thomas had also seen the change in Sam since he'd been home. His younger brother had always been restless, always looking toward the horizon for his next adventure. Now, for the first time, Sam had found something worth fighting for, worth staying in one place for. Thomas wouldn't be the one to stand in the way of that. "Go," Thomas said quietly. "Father will understand when he's better. The ranch will survive. But, if something happens to that girl because you weren't there to protect her, you'll never forgive yourself." Sam gripped his brother's hand gratefully. "I'll come back when this is settled. I promise." "I know you will," Thomas replied. "But, Sam? When you do come back, bring her with you. I'd like to meet the woman who finally gave my wandering brother a reason to settle down." Within 2 hours, Sam was packed and riding south through the mountain passes, pushing his horse as hard as he dared through the treacherous winter conditions. He had sent his own telegram ahead to Sheriff Morrison in Sarah's town, asking for details about the threats and requesting protection for Sarah until he could arrive. The journey that had taken him nearly a week when he traveled north in the autumn now became a desperate race against time. Sam changed horses at every station, slept only when exhaustion made it dangerous to continue riding, and drove himself and his mounts through conditions that would have turned back a less determined man. Meanwhile, in Texas, Sarah was discovering that the men who had threatened her were not bluffing. 2 days after she sent her telegram, she woke to find that someone had cut her fence lines during the night, allowing her small herd of cattle to wander onto the neighboring property. It took her most of the day to round them up with the help of her neighbor, Mr. Jensen, who was becoming increasingly concerned about the pattern of harassment. "This isn't random mischief, Sarah," Jensen told her as they repaired the damaged fences. "Someone's trying to make life difficult for you, hoping you'll give up and sell out." "I know," Sarah replied, her jaw set with determination. "But I'm not giving up. This is my home." That night, her chicken coop was damaged, and 3 of her best laying hens were killed. The attack was clearly deliberate. The henhouse had been torn apart with tools, not claws, and the dead birds had been left arranged in a neat row as a message. Sheriff Morrison arrived the next morning in response to Sarah's report, his face grim as he examined the evidence. This escalation concerns me greatly, he admitted. They're trying to destroy your livelihood piece by piece, hoping to drive you out without doing anything that would bring serious legal consequences. How can killing my livestock not bring legal consequences? Sarah asked, her voice shaking with anger and exhaustion. It does, but proving who did it is another matter entirely. Anyone could claim it was wild animals or random vandalism. Without witnesses or direct evidence linking specific individuals to the crimes, my hands are tied. Sarah felt despair creeping in for the first time since Sam's departure. Without her chickens, she would have no eggs to eat or sell in town. If they continued targeting her livestock and property, she wouldn't be able to sustain herself through the winter, regardless of how determined she was to stay. That afternoon brought a visit from Mrs. Patterson, who arrived with gossip disguised as concern. Sarah, dear, surely you can see that this situation is becoming impossible. Perhaps it would be wise to consider that offer those men made. There's no shame in accepting a reasonable price for your property and starting fresh somewhere safer. There's no offer to consider, Sarah replied firmly. I never saw any papers, never heard specific terms. They were more interested in making threats than conducting business. Mrs. Patterson clucked her tongue disapprovingly. Well, that young man of yours certainly chose an inconvenient time to abandon you. If he truly cared about your welfare, he wouldn't have left you to face this alone. The criticism of Sam sparked a fierce protective instinct in Sarah. Sam McGrath hasn't abandoned anyone. He's dealing with a family crisis, and he'll return as soon as he's able. In the meantime, I'm perfectly capable of handling my own affairs. But, even as she spoke the words, Sarah wondered if they were true. How long could she hold out against an organized campaign of intimidation? How many more nights could she lie awake listening to every sound outside, wondering if this would be the night they decided to burn her house down? Her answer came the following evening, when Sarah smelled smoke just after sunset. She rushed outside to find her hay barn engulfed in flames, the fire spreading so quickly it was clear accelerants had been used. There was nothing she could do but watch helplessly as winter feed for her remaining livestock went up in smoke. Mr. Jensen arrived within minutes, having seen the glow from his property, followed by several other neighbors who formed a bucket brigade to prevent the fire from spreading to Sarah's house. But the barn was lost, and, with it, her ability to feed her animals through the winter months. That's it, Jensen said grimly as they watched the last of the flames die down to smoldering embers. This has gone too far. Someone tried to kill you tonight, Sarah. If that fire had spread to the house. Sarah stared at the charred remains of the barn, feeling something break inside her chest. Not her determination that remained intact, but her illusion that she could handle this situation alone. She needed help, and she needed it soon. I'm staying at your place tonight, Mrs. Jensen announced, appearing beside her husband with a carpet bag in hand. In fact, I'm staying until that young man of yours gets back from Colorado. This nonsense has gone far enough. Sarah wanted to protest, to insist she could take care of herself, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was, she was exhausted and terrified, and the presence of another person in the house might be the only thing standing between her and further escalation of the attacks. That night, as Sarah and Mrs. Jensen sat in the kitchen drinking tea and listening to every creak and groan of the old house, a new sound reached their ears, the thunder of hoofbeats approaching at dangerous speed. Someone's coming fast, Mrs. Jensen whispered, moving toward the window to peer out into the darkness. Sarah's heart leaped with hope and fear. It could be Sam, riding through the night to reach her. But it could just as easily be the men who had been tormenting her, coming to finish what they had started with the barn fire. The hoofbeats slowed as they approached the house, and Sarah heard a familiar voice calling her name through the darkness. Sarah! Sarah, it's Sam. I'm here. She flew to the front door, throwing it open without thought for her safety. There in the moonlight stood Sam McGrath, covered in trail dust and exhaustion but alive and real and home. Sarah launched herself into his arms, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers as he held her tight. I'm here, he murmured into her hair, his voice rough with emotion and fatigue. I'm here, and I'm not leaving again. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. You came, Sarah whispered, pulling back to look at his face. I sent the telegram, but I wasn't sure. Nothing in this world could have kept me away, Sam said firmly. When I got your message, when I realized you were in danger. His voice trailed off as he noticed the blackened remains of the barn. Dear God, what did they do? Mrs. Jensen appeared in the doorway, her presence reminding Sarah that they had an audience for their reunion. Mr. McGrath, I'm Emma Jensen from the neighboring property. I think you and I need to have a serious conversation about what's been happening here. Over the next hour, Mrs. Jensen filled Sam in on the escalating pattern of harassment while Sarah sat beside him on the couch, her hand clasped firmly in his. With each detail of the threats and attacks, Sam's face grew darker with rage. Have you seen Sheriff Morrison about this? He asked when Mrs. Jensen finished her account. Several times, Sarah replied. He's been helpful, but there's only so much he can do without direct evidence linking specific people to the crimes. Sam was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed everything he had heard. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a steel that Sarah had never heard before. They made one crucial mistake, he said quietly. They threatened the woman I'm going to marry. That makes this personal, and I take personal matters very seriously. Sarah felt a shiver run through her that had nothing to do with fear. This was a side of Sam she had never seen, not the gentle cowboy who had quietly helped her through her grief, but a man who could be dangerous when protecting what he loved. What are you going to do? She asked. Sam looked at her with eyes that blazed with determination. I'm going to end this. But first, I'm going to make sure you're safe. Mrs. Jensen, would you be willing to have Sarah stay with your family for a few days while I handle this situation? Of course, Mrs. Jensen replied without hesitation. But, Sam, these men are dangerous. They're organized, and they have money behind them. You can't face them alone. Sam smiled for the first time since his arrival, but it wasn't his usual gentle smile. This one carried the promise of reckoning. I won't be alone. I have friends in Colorado who specialize in dealing with men like this. And I have something these men don't have. What's that? Sarah asked. I have a righteous cause, Sam replied, lifting her hand to kiss the ring he had placed on her finger months ago. I have love worth fighting for. As dawn broke over the Texas landscape, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah felt hope returning to her heart for the first time in days. Sam was home, and, whatever came next, they would face it together. The war for her land was far from over, but the tide was about to turn. The gentle cowboy who had won her heart was about to show their enemies exactly what happened to men who threatened the woman he loved. 3 days after Sam's return, the sound of approaching riders announced the arrival of reinforcements from Colorado. Sarah watched from the Jensen's front window as 5 men rode up to her property, all bearing the weather-beaten look of experienced ranch hands. But there was something different about these men, something in their bearing and the way they carried their weapons that suggested they were more than simple cowboys. Sam had spent those 3 days gathering information, talking to Sheriff Morrison, and making careful plans. Now, as he met with his friends from Colorado, Sarah could see the transformation that had taken place in her gentle cowboy. The man who had courted her with wildflowers and warm milk had revealed himself to be someone much more formidable when circumstances demanded it. Who are they? Mrs. Jensen asked, peering over Sarah's shoulder at the group of men setting up what appeared to be a temporary camp on Sarah's property. Men who've dealt with land grabbers before, Sam had explained earlier. Back in Colorado, we had trouble with a railroad company trying to force ranchers off their land through intimidation. These boys helped resolve that situation permanently. Sarah had wanted to ask what permanently meant in this context, but something in Sam's tone suggested she might not want to know the details. That afternoon, Richard Dalton and his associates returned to Sarah's property, apparently unaware that the situation had changed dramatically. Sarah watched from the safety of the Jensen's house as Dalton's confident swagger faltered when he realized he was facing not a lone woman, but a group of armed men who clearly knew their business. Sam stepped out of Sarah's house to meet them, his demeanor calm but unmistakably dangerous. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the transformation in his posture. Gone was the easy, relaxed bearing of a man at peace with the world. In its place stood someone who radiated controlled menace. "Mr. Dalton," Sam called out, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I understand you've been having some business discussions with my fiancée in my absence." Dalton looked around nervously at the other men, who had positioned themselves strategically around the property. "And you are?" "Samuel McGrath. The woman you've been threatening belongs to me, and this land belongs to her." "That makes your business my business." "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Dalton said, attempting to regain his composure. "We made Mrs. Thompson a legitimate business offer, which she declined." "That's hardly threatening behavior." "Burning her barn was a business offer?" Sam asked, taking a step closer. "Killing her livestock was part of your negotiation strategy? Threatening her with accidents and fires was just friendly conversation?" Dalton's face paled as he realized how much Sam knew about their activities. "I don't know what you think you can prove, but I don't need to prove anything to you," Sam interrupted quietly. "I only need to make sure you understand that the situation has changed. You're not dealing with an isolated widow anymore. You're dealing with me, and my associates." One of Sam's Colorado friends, a tall man with graying hair and scars on his hands that spoke of a violent past, moved slightly closer to Dalton's group. The message was clear without being spoken. "Mrs. Thompson's property is no longer available for purchase," Sam continued. "Not now, not ever, not at any price. Any further attempts to intimidate her or damage her property will be considered acts of war. And, gentlemen, I promise you that war is something you want to avoid." Dalton straightened, trying to recover some of his earlier bravado. "You can't threaten us." "There are laws in this state, and laws that Sheriff Morrison will be happy to enforce," Sam agreed. "Especially since he's been building quite a file on your activities in this area." Funny how witnesses start coming forward when they know someone's willing to protect them. Sarah felt her breath catch. Sam had been busier during the past 3 days than she had realized. He hadn't just gathered armed support, he had been building a legal case as well. "But, more importantly," Sam continued, his voice dropping to a tone that carried across the yard like a promise of retribution, "there are older laws than what's written in books. Laws about protecting what's yours. Laws about defending the woman you love. Laws about making men pay for the harm they've caused." Dalton looked around again at the hard-faced men surrounding him, finally, beginning to understand that he was no longer in control of the situation. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're right," Sam agreed. "It's not over. It's decided. You have 24 hours to remove yourselves from this county permanently. If you're still here tomorrow night, if we see you or your associates anywhere near Mrs. Thompson or her property ever again, we'll consider it a declaration of intent to cause harm. And we'll respond accordingly." The threat hung in the air like smoke, and Dalton seemed to understand that he was no longer dealing with simple farmers and ranchers. These were men who had faced down worse than land-grabbing schemes, and they weren't intimidated by veiled threats or financial pressure. "You can't just run people out of town," one of Dalton's companions protested weakly. Sam smiled, and Sarah shivered at how cold the expression was. "We're not running you out. We're giving you the opportunity to leave voluntarily with your health and dignity intact. What happens if you choose to stay is entirely up to you." Dalton and his men remounted their horses and rode away without another word, but Sarah could tell from their posture that this wasn't a surrender. It was a strategic retreat while they regrouped and considered their options. That evening, Sam came to the Jensen's house to check on Sarah and to explain what had happened. She had never seen him like this, still recognizably the man she loved, but with an edge that spoke of capabilities she was only beginning to understand. "Are they really gone?" she asked as they sat together on the Jensen's porch. "For now," Sam replied. "But men like that don't give up easily when there's money involved. They'll be back, probably with more men and definitely with a different strategy." Sarah felt fear creep back into her chest. "Then, what was the point of today?" "The point was to let them know that you're not alone anymore," Sam said, taking her hand in his. "To show them that attacking you means going through me and my friends." to make them understand that the easy intimidation approach isn't going to work. But, if they come back with more men? Sam squeezed her hand gently. Then, we'll be ready for them. Sarah, there's something you need to understand about men like Dalton. They're bullies, and bullies only respect strength. They thought they could terrorize you because you were alone and defenseless. Now they know that's not the case. I'm scared, Sarah admitted. Not just of them, but of what this might turn you into. You're not the same man who left for Colorado. Sam was quiet for a moment, considering her words. You're right, he said finally. I'm not the same man. Leaving you here defenseless while I dealt with family obligations taught me something about my priorities. You and our future together are more important to me than anything else in this world, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect that. Even if it means violence? Even if it means violence, Sam confirmed without hesitation. Sarah, I love your gentle heart, and I hope you never have to see the worst of what men can do to each other. But I won't apologize for being willing to fight for you. Some things are worth fighting for, and you're at the top of that list. Sarah studied his face in the lamplight, seeing both the man she had fallen in love with and this new, harder version that circumstances had revealed. Will you be able to come back from this? When it's over, will you be able to be the Sam McGrath who brought me warm milk and wildflowers? Sam's expression softened, and Sarah caught a glimpse of her gentle cowboy beneath the protective warrior he had become. I'll always be that man with you, he promised. But I'll also always be the man who won't let anyone hurt you. Can you accept both sides of me? Sarah thought about the question seriously. The truth was, this harder side of Sam didn't frighten her as much as she had expected. Instead, it made her feel safer, more protected than she had since her husband's death. There was something deeply comforting about knowing that the man she loved was capable of defending what mattered to him. I can accept both sides, she said finally. But I have one condition. What's that? When this is over, when these men are gone and we're safe, I want us to be married immediately. I don't want to wait any longer to start our life together. Sam's face broke into the first genuine smile she had seen from him since his return. Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, nothing would make me happier than to marry you tomorrow if it were possible. Then, let's make it possible, Sarah said, surprising herself with her boldness. Let's ask Reverend Williams to perform the ceremony as soon as this business is finished. Before Sam could respond, the sound of gunshots shattered the evening quiet. Both of them were on their feet instantly, looking towards Sarah's property where they could see the flickering light of what appeared to be another fire. Stay here, Sam ordered, but Sarah was already moving toward her coat. Like hell I will, she replied, her own steel showing through. That's my home they're attacking. Sam looked at her for a moment, then nodded with something like pride. Then, stay close to me and do exactly what I tell you. They ran across the field towards Sarah's property, where Sam's friends were engaged in a firefight with what appeared to be a much larger group of men. The attackers had come under cover of darkness, apparently hoping to finish what they had started with intimidation through overwhelming force. But they had underestimated both the skill of Sam's Colorado friends and the determination of the local community. As Sarah and Sam approached the battle, they could see neighbors arriving from all directions, armed and ready to defend one of their own. Mr. Jensen appeared beside them, carrying a rifle and wearing a grim expression. About time we had a proper fight, he said. I've been getting tired of watching good people get pushed around. The battle was brief but decisive. Dalton's hired guns had expected to face a few ranch hands. Instead, they found themselves up against experienced fighters who had the advantage of defending familiar ground. Within an hour, the attackers were in full retreat, leaving behind several wounded men and clear evidence of their intentions. Sheriff Morrison arrived just as the last shots were being fired, accompanied by federal marshals who had been investigating the land-grabbing scheme across multiple counties. Sarah watched in amazement as Dalton and his remaining associates were arrested on charges that included arson, destruction of property, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Turns out your Mr. Dalton has been running this scam across 3 states, Sheriff Morrison explained to Sam and Sarah as the prisoners were loaded into wagons. The federal government's been tracking him for months. Your telegraph to me about the situation here gave them the break they needed to move in. As dawn broke over the Texas landscape once again, Sarah stood in the ruins of her barn and surveyed the damage to her property. It was considerable. The barn was gone, fences were damaged, and bullet holes decorated the side of her house. But she was alive, Sam was safe, and their enemies were defeated. It's going to take a lot of work to rebuild, she said, leaning against Sam's solid warmth. Then, we'd better get married soon so I can get started, Sam replied, wrapping his arms around her. I hear a man works twice as hard when he's working for his wife. Sarah tilted her face up to look at him, seeing her gentle cowboy restored now that the threat had passed. Is that a proposal, Mr. McGrath? That's a promise, Mrs. Thompson. A promise that I intend to keep starting today. 3 weeks later, on a crisp February morning, Sarah Elizabeth Thompson became Sarah Elizabeth McGrath in a ceremony held in the rebuilt barn that had been raised by their neighbors as a wedding gift. She wore her grandmother's dress, altered to fit her by the skilled hands of women who had become true friends through the trials they had shared. Sam wore his best suit and, the silver locket she had given him so many months ago, now returned to hang around her neck as he had promised. When Reverend Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Sam kissed her thoroughly while their assembled friends and neighbors cheered. At the reception that followed, Sam stood to address their guests. Ladies and gentlemen, when I came to Texas last year, I was a drifter looking for work. I found something much more valuable. I found a home. Not just in this beautiful land, but in the heart of an extraordinary woman who taught me that real strength isn't about being tough enough to face the world alone. It's about being brave enough to let someone else fight beside you. He raised his glass in a toast. To my wife, who murmured that she had nothing for me, not knowing that what she had to offer was everything I had ever wanted. To love that grows stronger under pressure, to communities that stand together against those who would harm their own, and to new beginnings built on the foundation of old promises kept. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Sam and Sarah stood together on the porch of what was now truly their home. The landscape stretched out before them, painted silver by the full moon and holding promises of seasons to come. Any regrets? Sam asked, his arm around her waist. Sarah thought about everything they had been through, the loss, the fear, the uncertainty, the danger, and, finally, the joy of overcoming it all together. She touched the ring on her finger, the symbol of promises made and kept, of love that had proven itself stronger than any obstacle. Only one, she said, smiling up at her husband. I regret that I ever thought I had nothing to offer you. It turns out I had everything you needed, just like you had everything I needed. We just needed time to discover it. Sam pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair and the promise of all their tomorrows. We have all the time in the world now, Mrs. McGrath. What should we do with it? Sarah stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, her heart full of plans and dreams and the absolute certainty that whatever challenges life might bring, they would face them together. We build a life, she said simply. We love each other, we work hard, we raise our children on this land, and we prove that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as the hardest things we have to survive. As they went inside their house together, the Texas sky settled into peaceful darkness around them, holding their love story safe beneath the endless canopy of stars. The cowboy had kept his promise, the woman had found her strength, and their love had proven itself worthy of the fight it had required. In her final journal entry that night, Sarah wrote, "Today I married my best friend, my protector, and my partner in all things." The girl who once whispered that she had nothing for him has become a woman who knows she has everything to give. Love, it turns out, doesn't make us weak, it makes us brave enough to become who we were always meant to be. And, in the margin beside those words, Sam added his own note, "She brought me home. Not to a place, but to a purpose. Not to a house, but to a heart. Not to an ending, but to a beginning that will last all the days of our lives." Outside their window, the wind whispered across the Texas plains, carrying the promise of spring and the certainty of love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger than ever before.